Today we're looking at Romans chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. So as I mentioned before, we're looking at the promises of God through the book of Romans, and we began in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 and 5. And so now we come to verses 16 and 17. And so at first glance, it may not seem like this is a promise, but it is. If you see, he says, the gospel is the power of God for salvation for everyone who believes. The emphasis here in verses 16 and 17 is on the action of God, the power of God for salvation. And yes, it includes belief, everyone who believes. And then in verse 17, it talks about faith, from faith to faith, and the righteous man shall live by faith. But the promise is that God is the power in salvation, that it doesn't rest on us. And so while we exercise faith, the power of God, and we're going to see this fleshed out in Romans, is the source of our faith, that the gospel is the power of God for salvation, not our faithfulness. As I said, this is something that we'll see more details and fleshed out more later on in Romans, but right now we can say this is a promise that our salvation does not rest on us, but on God. The gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And then to reiterate that in verse 17, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. So it doesn't rest on our righteousness. We see this in chapter 3. But it rests on God's righteousness, the righteousness of God, and that is revealed from faith to faith. And then to make it more clear, he quotes, but the righteous man shall live by faith. And that is a quote from Habakkuk. So our rightness with God, our ability to come into his presence and to have our relationship with him restored, comes only in the perfect righteousness of God that he provides through the perfect righteousness of his Son, the God-man, Jesus. And we lay hold of that by faith, which is also a gift of God, as we clearly saw in Ephesians chapter 2, that God gives us this faith. So our standing with God rests on his power and on his grace. And that is a wonderful, wonderful promise. Because as I said, if it rested on us, we would be undone. It would be over. It doesn't rest on us. And so we hold on to the promise that the gospel is the power of God for salvation. The salvation isn't the power of us and our faith. It's the power of God and his grace. So hopefully that is comforting for you as you are distracted or can be distracted by the devil and the things of this world and worries and fears. This is a cornerstone. This is a foundational promise that you can come back to. Come back to this and say, I am right with my God because of his grace and his power, not me. No matter how many times I fall, I stand on the rock of Jesus Christ. And by his Spirit, he is making me more like Christ. So those are promises that you can bank your life on and your eternity.